everyone. My name is Catherine Gorley, and I'd like to thank you for tuning in today for another episode of the Injury Prevention Academy, a podcast brought to you by DORN Companies, the country's leading wellness-based pain management and injury prevention company. DORN is committed to reducing costs of healthcare and workers' compensation, as well as reducing lost productivity, which has resulted in over $100 million in savings over the last 20 years for our clients. Joining us today is Clinton Marquardt. Clinton is an international expert in fatigue for the transportation industry, and we look forward to hearing more about his insights and experience in the world of safety and the world of sleep. Welcome, Clinton.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on, Catherine, and for inviting me to chat with you today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And your work experience, the job that you've been doing in Canada and even for the Canadian government and the legal system has been really interesting just over the last few years.
Yeah, it's been an interesting ride too. You know, the demand for services has increased as more and more companies start to take or focus on the great benefits you can achieve from managing sleep and fatigue a little differently. So the need for services like mine has increased, but also the types of services have changed too. So you hinted at the legal system. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of legal cases now referring to sleep and fatigue, especially when there is shift work involved. And one of the reasons for that is because if a shift work system isn't designed properly, it can increase fatigue and risk from it. So what the legal system is seeing is that the organizations have a strong responsibility to design biologically compatible shift schedules. If they don't, it could result in fatigue that contributes to an accident or incident on the job.
Absolutely.
So they're seeing that aspect of it, but they're also seeing that employees, the workforce, have got a duty to manage their sleep and fatigue according to the workplace's guidelines. And if they don't, they could be putting their coworkers at risk as well. So there's, both sides of that coin, but yeah, the legal system is getting really interested in looking at aspects of sleep and fatigue.
Especially in all the different sectors, like you said, where those shifts are, say, just like not a normal sleep schedule. You have the night shifts, you have those ones that kind of cross over between the night shift and the day shift. You can have someone working from 11 p.m. to 8 or 9 in the morning, and that's going to affect a lot.
Yeah, anytime there's, and I think you have to broaden the concept or the scope of what we mean by shift work. When I started doing this 30 years ago, shift work meant it had to include some sort of a night shift, right? Otherwise it wasn't shift work. Now what we're seeing is any work pattern that requires the displacement of nocturnal or nighttime sleep is considered shift work. So as you said, one example, people starting at 2300 at night, working till 7 or 8 in the morning. Well, that's pretty obviously a shift.
A night shift, yeah.
A night shift. But sometimes companies only have that shift. And if they don't have a day shift, they say, well, we're not really shift work because we've got regular duties. Right? And the regular duties just happen at night. But they are displacing the ability to sleep at night. So we do still consider them shift work. Another good example is perhaps you don't have that, that typical graveyard shift, but you do have a shift that, say, starts at 8 o'clock at night and goes till maybe 2 o'clock in the morning, 6-hour shift. Well, it means that people are working till 2 o'clock in the morning and then likely driving home in the middle of the night. Yeah. That's considered shift work as well, in spite of still being able to get maybe 3, 4, 5 hours of nighttime sleep. They still have to displace it forward a little bit to get their full 8 hours. Yeah. So if we broaden the concept of shift work and people understand that and they want to deal with sleep and fatigue differently, it ties back into more people needing more services like mine. Right.
And obviously, I think the definitions of different shift work are really becoming very universal. The idea of fatigue is becoming very universal. And you're from Canada and I'm from the US. So how do you find that approach has really become universal when you're approaching the idea of fatigue?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Again, years ago, 30 years ago, when I started working in this area, there were some pretty big differences in between companies, countries, continents, even. But what has happened is that, and one of the reasons for that is because most of the guidelines around how to develop shifts or limitations to duty and work periods weren't based on science. They were based on operational needs. So we need people to work 12 hours. Well, here's the number of 12-hour shifts you're going to work. What we're seeing is that the science around sleep and fatigue is so strong now that it's not debatable. Right? One of the really great findings over the last 15 years is that when you approach 17, 18 hours of straight wakefulness, continuous wakefulness, some aspects of your performance are like you're legally drunk, like you've got a blood alcohol concentration of 0.05 to 0.08%. So it's findings like that that are now driving the rules and guidelines around how we develop shifts and the limitations we put on those duties. So if the science is pretty clear and the science doesn't differ from country to country, the rules are all starting to look very similar, say between United States and Canada. You look in aviation, they're probably, I would say, the farthest ahead in all of the industries. Canadian rules, not all that different from US rules.
Okay.
So yeah, it's all starting to merge and be much more consistent because the science is so consistent. Yeah.
Right, and you mentioned the different industries that can be affected. You mentioned aviation. We here at DORN, we really tend to focus on manufacturing, but I know that those long shifts can also be applied to, say, the entertainment industry, where people are awake from 3 o'clock in the morning all the way up until midnight that next day. So it's something that can really be applied to different industries.
Yeah, and one of my colleagues in Vancouver, and I believe DORN has featured her before, Mike Hartnett, does a lot of work with the film industry out west, and says the exact same thing as you. Right? It's we don't really think of it if you're not in the film industry, but yeah, the work they do does displace sleep and increase the risk of fatigue. The work that you guys do at DORN, focusing on manufacturing. Well, sure, maybe manufacturing might not be running 24/7. But their business waxes and wanes, and they might need some really long duty periods sometimes, which decreases the time available for sleep, which increases the risk of fatigue. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's so interesting finding those universal points, especially when it comes to things that can really affect workers and affect employees in different sectors. So now obviously we're in 2021 now. Thank God. How has COVID accelerated people's understanding? And obviously, I think wellness as a whole has been that big push during this past year. How has that affected that sleep and fatigue?
Yeah, I think you sort of hit the point of what's occurring. COVID has thrown us all for a loop. It's 2021, it's getting better, but remember how terrible it was in 2020. We're all scrambling. And what I think came out of a lot of that, which is actually a really good thing, I think, is a stronger focus on wellness and self-care, taking care of ourselves, understanding the things that are driving us down, that are decreasing our mental health and our physical health a lot better. And when you probe around in the factors that affect our wellness and things we can do to improve self-care, you find that sleep has a direct impact on our overall well-being. So if you can improve sleep, improves your well-being, your mental, your physical health, decreases all sorts of short-term risks, like getting the common cold. Right? If you sleep longer than 6 hours, you're about 4 times less likely to get the common cold. Okay. The research around COVID and the immune system is still coming out, but it kind of makes logical sense. If your immune system is stronger, evidence is the studies around getting the common cold, there's a chance that if you sleep better, sleep longer, better quality sleep, longer sleep, your immune system might be stronger. which then means if you are exposed to COVID, the COVID virus, your body might fight it off a bit better than somebody who's not sleeping as well or as long. Those studies are still coming out, but logically it makes sense.
Yes.
So going back to your original question, COVID has increased our focus on wellness, overall well-being, and the things we can do to improve or pay more attention to self-care. And that has translated into a focus on sleep, because sleep has such a strong effect on all sorts of components of our lives. When you improve sleep, you also improve fatigue. So you can improve safety and other associated risks that come from poor sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that will increase that worker's productivity at work, but it'll also increase morale, which obviously is really that backbone of what wellness truly entails.
Yeah, and that's a really neat point. So when I talk to organizations, the link between fatigue and safety is a pretty easy one to make. But to revamp your whole safety system costs a lot of money. Right? And they want to see a big payoff. Now, thankfully, we're not driving trucks off cliffs or blowing up manufacturing plants every day because of fatigue. But there are a ton of very small costs that companies aren't looking at or thinking about that are directly associated with fatigue. So things like small injuries. You mentioned productivity. Sure, productivity decreases when you're fatigued. When you're fatigued, you react more slowly and you make more mistakes.
Yes.
Reacting slowly, more mistakes, slows down productivity. Sick leave is directly linked to poor sleep. You mentioned morale within the company. Well, this is a really interesting one. Think about the last time you were fatigued and whether or not you were a happy person or a cranky person. If you're like me, you're probably on the cranky side. So imagine now you've got a whole workforce that's cranky. What's morale going to look like if everybody at work is cranky all the time? Right? Going to be short-tempered. You're not going to be as empathic. You'll make more mistakes. You'll get frustrated with other people's mistakes more. So if you add up all of these little hidden costs, turn them into hidden benefits, improve morale, improved productivity, improved costs associated with sick leave, then companies really start to take notice. They say, oh yeah, safety for sure we can improve, but if we measure all of these other components, look at all the other great benefits we can get from it. Morale being one of them. Yeah.
Right. And you mentioned those tiny mistakes that can occur when people do not get enough sleep. And I actually was reading the other day, the National Safety Council has said that more than 70 million Americans actually suffer from some sort of sleep disorder, whether it's insomnia. I believe it can even be linked to just not getting enough, just on a normal basis, whether it's stress or whether it's, you're a new parent and you get no sleep at all. So, it's those tiny mistakes, and you work in the transportation industry. So how do you see those mistakes really kind of snowballing?
So one of the positions I held was the fatigue specialist for the Transportation Safety Board of Canada.
Yeah.
And the role, same thing as the United States NTSB, the role of those organizations is to investigate federally regulated industries that have accidents, with the goal of making suggestions or recommendations so that the same accident doesn't happen again.
Right.
So that's where I saw, as you said, the snowball effect of one little mistake turning into a huge disaster.
Yes.
So for example, there was one railway incident I looked at where the operator of a train was fatigued and didn't see a signpost as he's crossing by, so maintained his track speed. Now, a train, a freight train, even if it's traveling at a slow speed, has a really hard time stopping if it's a long, heavy train.
Absolutely.
So what this train operator ended up doing was missing the sign that told him there's a crossing, you got to slow down, kept going at track speed, went across a crossing, and in front of him was another stationary train. Oh. So they plowed into the train in front of them, derailed, I forget what it was, 10 or 15 cars. Luckily, they were out in the boonies, no fire or explosions from it.
Good.
But it was, hundreds of thousands, if not $1 million of damage just because of missing one sign because that person was fatigued.
Right.
So yeah, these little tiny incidents can turn into huge ones. And this happens in all industries, including manufacturing, right? So manufacturing, if the organizations start tapping into and measuring these little mistakes, they can prevent the big ones from happening. Maybe somebody reacts slowly in stopping a manufacturing process. I'm thinking, like an assembly line type of situation,
right?
Where a matter of 30 seconds could cause a huge delay, if not destruction of the products they're making down the line. So somebody might, see an issue and not stop the process, let it keep going, and then bang, huge outcome from it. So it does tend to snowball, yeah.
Right, and it's not some, you have those catastrophic events that occur, say with machinery, where the machinery is hurt. But in fatigue, you can also hurt yourself. You can also hurt your back, you can hurt your shoulders, you can hurt your legs if, say, you're very fatigued and you're not picking something up correctly. You're not moving the way that a machine needs you to move in order to do your job. And like in the transportation industry, you could absolutely hurt yourself with either unloading or just even driving.
Yes, and one of the reasons for that is there's some pretty reliable drops in our abilities that keep us safe. So things like our ability to pay attention, stay focused on the task, our ability to remember things. So I'm thinking, perhaps, most people in manufacturing that have to do any lifting or moving of things get training on proper lift and proper movement of objects. If you're fatigued, you're not going to be paying attention as well. You might not remember the training you had. Or we also know that people are fatigued, make poor decisions. You might say, well, just this time, I'm not going to put my support belt on. I'm just going to lift this heavy box. It's just one box.
Because I'm busy. It's fine.
Yeah. And then, oh no, I just wrecked my back.
Yes.
Right? And those are typical fatigue related errors. And these are the errors that are costing people their health. Right? It's costing them their health. They're getting injured from it. It's costing the organization because now they've got an injured worker who can't work for them, or there's some compensation that has to be paid.
Right.
But it's getting organizations to make that link, to see that these small things can be impacted by fatigue, can be a result of fatigue. So another great reason to look at, can we help our workers with their sleep and fatigue?
Right. And obviously it's with the body mechanics that people can use to do their jobs, whether it's in the supply chain industry, whether or not it's in manufacturing. And as we get into the last couple of years and into this decade, how has technology actually informed helping people with these issues?
So technology has come a long way. Again, I've been working in this world for 30 years, and the technology that came out years ago, I used to fluff it off. Forget it. It's a gimmick. Don't bother spending your $50 on it. But it's progressed so far now that I will actually incorporate it into my fatigue management strategies that I recommend for companies. So if you take a consumer wearable like a Fitbit, they're getting pretty accurate at tracking a person's sleep. They don't tell you if you're fatigued or not, but they tell you what your sleep looked like. And if people understand the sleep components that result in fatigue, they can then use the information that, say, a Fitbit gives them to help them understand whether or not they're at increased risk of fatigue. And I'll give you a really good example of this. We know that quality and quantity of sleep have a direct relationship to fatigue. So poor quality, low quantity of sleep increases the risk of fatigue. We know that if you sleep for, say, less than 6 hours for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 nights in a row, your risk of fatigue increases. That's one, what I call fatigue risk factor. So people can simply look at the app, look back in time and say, okay, I might not feel fatigued, but I have only slept for, say, 5.5 hours for 5-6 nights in a row. There's a good chance I'm a little more fatigued than I think I am.
Right, because you get used to that level of fatigue. So
you get used,
you think that you can work through.
It becomes the new normal, right? The new, this is how I feel all the time, so nothing's changed, I must be okay. Or the other thing that happens is our performance starts to drop before we feel fatigue, before we can recognize we're really fatigued. So you might not feel fatigued, but if you've got a few of these fatigue risk factors, like not getting enough sleep in the last week or so, you probably are fatigued and your performance is probably already dropped. So now is the time to take action. Don't wait until you feel fatigued. So if we can combine, very simple consumer wearables, Fitbit, Garmin, the iWatch, things of that nature, with a bit of education around sleep and fatigue, they're really useful tools nowadays.
Right, and even DORN has a program that we call Alert Meter, where it uses a gamified system in order to just kind of continually check that fatigue, especially say with like drivers, where they don't feel like they're fatigued, but let's try this and let's see if your brain is reacting as fast as, say, if you were fully kind of, I'd say, I'm not sure the right term, but almost like fully slept,
Yes.
fully alert.
Yeah, so Alert Meter is a really good system, providing it's used the way you guys use it. Right?
Yes.
You can't say Alert Meter is going to solve all your problems. No, you have to build it into a bit of a program so people understand that Alert Meter is really looking for performance impairments that are usually related to fatigue, but they could be related to other things as well. Maybe if somebody's taken an allergy medication that has slowed them down a little bit. Well, that would cause an impairment that Alert Meter would probably pick up. So if you combine things like Alert Meter, and especially your guys' version of it, into a system around managing fatigue, they're excellent tools. Yeah.
Yeah. And kind of going, I think, a step farther with technology. I was reading an article earlier this month that was published by the BBC about some companies in the UK starting to experiment with self-driving trucks. They're going to be doing the trucks along the highway without that main driver driving it, but still having a person within the cab monitoring the system, always having someone there just in case, say, they have to stop or something is going on. So how do you feel that, even though they're not actively driving, I personally feel like fatigue is still going to be something that you have to keep track of.
Yeah, I don't think that the technology is quite there yet within the driverless vehicle area. Plus, I don't think the general population is comfortable with just allowing all these vehicles to drive themselves on the road just yet. Right? So we got to get through that. We got to get through that cultural barrier, or that thought process barrier first. But one of the things I'm a little nervous about in driverless vehicles is people over relying on the technology, right? So in the example you gave in the BBC article, I guess it was, what if a person says, well, I'm really confident in this truck's ability to drive itself. So I know I've got a ride in one tomorrow. The truck's going to handle it themselves. So I'm going to stay up late and watch a movie tonight with my romantic partner. Right. And sure, I'm only going to get 4 hours of sleep. And sure, I'm going to be fatigued. But I don't really care because the truck's going to do its own thing.
Is doing its own thing. Absolutely.
What happens then if there's some sort of glitch in the truck, or it needs some sort of input that the observer, or the, not driver, but the other person in the vehicle reacts just a little too slowly to give that input, right? So there's challenges. I think we're in the right direction. But I think there's lots of concerns and challenges that have to be overcome first before we just unleash all these vehicles on the road without humans in them.
Right. Well, but even I think giving those people that proper understanding of fatigue, even though the technology is there that's going to assist them in driving, there's still that need to be alert. There's still that need to even just take care of yourself, have that be a part of your own personal wellness plan.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah. And I think, again, you said a really important component there, which is people need the awareness, they need the education, they need the information so that they can make the informed decisions, so they can make the right decisions, so that they can understand what risk they're taking on if they don't manage their sleep and fatigue properly. They can understand the great benefits they can get if they do manage their sleep and fatigue properly. Yeah, but I think that's key. I think we really need to focus or ensure that we as people understand sleep and fatigue so that we can be safe and productive and healthy too.
Yeah, and we've kind of circled the whole idea of sleep and fatigue knowledge as part of an overall wellness plan. And that I think is a huge part of where I see a lot of companies going to establish that culture of employees taking charge of their wellness, but companies also having it be a priority for wellness. Is that something that you're seeing a lot of too?
I am. Yeah. So companies are seeing the responsibility they have, but also the influential role they can play. But they do need the workforce to collaborate with them, to take on some of that responsibility. Without both sides playing together, it doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. I'll give you a really good example of this. I sat down with an executive from the C-suite, as you will, from the railway industry a number of years ago. And he showed me this huge display of one railway operator's work pattern and said, look at all the free time this person has. How can they be fatigued? And then I said, well, have you ever given them any training on sleep and fatigue? No, we haven't, but there's lots of time. Well, if you haven't given them the tools, the information to make the right decisions, how do you expect them to make the right decisions? So you do need both sides playing together for both sides to benefit, really.
Right, and seeing that trickle down effect, it's from those C-level executives, it's down to the managers and the supervisors, the regular employees. It's about maintaining and making that wellness a priority.
Yeah, and I think that's consistent with your guys' approach, right? It's not just to look at the workforce level, it's to look at the whole thing in a comprehensive fashion and see how are all these pieces playing together? Are they playing well? Or are they not playing well together? And if something's not, you got to figure out why and then make a change in there so the whole system works well together. Workforce plus management side of things.
Right. Now, We've talked about the different sectors that I think people normally think of fatigue, that railway, the manufacturing, the aerospace. How has that shift in maybe even into office work informed fatigue? Because I think that's a sector that a lot of people don't really think about when they think of fatigue.
Yeah, it's trickling in there slowly, right? There's still a bit of an idea that, the only people that have to worry about fatigue are so-called shift workers, and fitting within the definition we gave, which was if a work pattern displaces nighttime sleep, it's considered shift work.
Right.
But 9 to 5 workers can become fatigued as well. 9 to 5 workers work overtime. 9 to 5 workers have very busy lives sometimes that reduces the time available to sleep. What I'm seeing in these traditional office workers, traditional hours workers, the 9 to 5 or standard work hours, we normally refer to it as, where we're making inroads is on the wellness side of things. So there's lots of companies seeing the link between sleep and health, mental and physical health, and well-being, which is a component of both, really. And they're slowly understanding, oh yeah, it's not just about health, it's also about safety, which is more related to the fatigue side of things. Because you can stub your toe, you can, drop a stapler on your hand, whatever. There's all sorts of injuries that can occur at work, in standard office work as well. Plus, there's all sorts of mistakes people can make at work too, not just resulting in injuries, but accountants during tax time, they work tons and tons of hours.
Yes.
A small calculation error, a small decision around finances can have a huge financial impact on a company.
Mm-hmm.
So they're starting to take notice of the impact of fatigue, but it's coming through a focus on sleep and wellness, which is, I have no problem with that, as long as we're starting to get people to think about sleep and fatigue in the standard work hours people.
Right. And even outside of that traditional office environment, because so many people are still working remotely, that's still an issue that comes up.
Of course. Work hasn't stopped just because they're all working at home. Mm-hmm. In fact, oftentimes the accessibility that online meeting tools have provided us means we might not be working more hours, but we're working much more variable hours, right? So maybe we don't get all our meetings done during the day and we have a meeting in the evening.
Right.
Whereas if you're working 9 to 5, you never have that meeting one. If the meeting occurs too late at night, or you've still got tons of stuff you got to get done after your work meeting, mm-hmm. It might impact how much sleep that you get at night. So yeah, the fatigue and sleep issue hasn't gone away just because we're now, lots of us are working from home.
Right. And you talked about the utilizing those video meetings, and with Zoom, GoToMeetings, Teams, there's all these different avenues that companies can take to really keep their office workers / remote workers engaged into their work. But how is now this new term that they call Zoom fatigue really kind of come up, especially obviously in the past year?
Yes, I'm really glad you asked about this, because what we've been really talking about up till now is what I call sleep-related fatigue. So it's fatigue that results from sleep-related factors: poor sleep, poor quality of sleep, circadian rhythms, our biological rhythms within us that get essentially out of whack, or we're working when our brain thinks it should be asleep. Right? Mm-hmm. So it's fatigue that results from those factors. And another way of thinking about this type of fatigue is to simply replace the term fatigue with sleepiness, ranging from really, really low levels of sleepiness that are barely perceivable to extreme levels of sleepiness or extreme fatigue where you can't even stay awake. Now, that's a little bit different from the concept of Zoom fatigue, which I would consider more along the lines of like mental fatigue. Fatigue that results from essentially using your brain too much, either intensely for a short period of time or in a prolonged fashion as well. Zoom fatigue is, and virtual meeting fatigue, if you want to broaden it,
yes,
is a reality, right? When you are having to sit focused on a tiny little screen for hours and hours and on, and still expected to pay attention to everything else going on around you, like emails popping up, it's hard to stay engaged. You need to expend essentially brain power to stay focused, which increases this sensation of fatigue. It doesn't it can impact your performance, can drop your, the harder you pay attention, the harder it is to pay attention. It can have other impacts on your abilities as well. Maybe not to the same dangerous effects as sleep-related fatigue, but it's still a cause for concern. One of the reasons is because if you combine these different types or different sources of fatigue, it's even worse. So if you are experiencing virtual meeting fatigue, but you also have some sleep-related fatigue, it's going to make the Zoom meeting even harder to attend to.
Yes.
So one of the remedies for that is smaller virtual meetings, or I should say shorter virtual meetings, or breaks during the meeting, a good variety of information in the meeting, and people need to learn how to be more engaged in when they're presenting, right? So if I was just to lean back and now start talking like this, and we tried to do this session like this,
right? All of a sudden, everyone's minds just go like this.
Yeah, they've gone, right? Zoom fatigue kicks in right away. So it's a different medium, and we have to use it differently. But it is definitely a concern.
Yeah, it's interesting seeing all of the different ways that fatigue can really affect your day-to-day lives. You know,
there's, you might have heard of the very famous, now famous researcher Matthew Walker.
Okay.
And in one of his TED Talks, he says there's virtually no aspect of your life that sleep does not impact, and it's true. You can link sleep back to almost every component of your life. Poor sleep equals less happy life, less safe life, less productive life, less healthy life. Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. And as we get into this next decade, I really see that education for fatigue and for sleep being so much a part of how we approach the different aspects of our life.
Yeah, and I'm pretty excited about this change. When I started doing presentations, I would talk about sleep disorders. You mentioned that 70 million Americans have got some sort of diagnosable sleep disorder. Mm-hmm. And there's close to 90 different sleep disorders that are recognized. So you can walk into a sleep clinic and walk out with your choice of one of 90 different disorders.
Oh gosh.
One of them, which perhaps the audiences have heard of, is called obstructive sleep apnea, mm-hmm. a respiratory condition where you pause breathing at night. It can become very, very dangerous at the mm-hmm. higher levels, the more severe levels. When I first started doing talks and I mentioned sleep apnea, I just got a blank face. Nobody knew what it was. And now almost everybody has heard about sleep apnea. And we're seeing this progression over time, more and more education. Even people not working in shift work are learning much more about sleep and fatigue and paying much more attention to it, which in my mind, my opinion, can only improve ourselves and the world. So I think it's a great change we're seeing.
Right, because you even talked about that shift in seeing that increased morale, seeing that increase of just happiness at work when it comes to interacting with your fellow employees. That's going to inform a lot about your company's culture.
Most definitely is. Most definitely is. Yeah. I would not argue that point whatsoever.
Right. Yeah. So I have to ask, how did you get into this field of study? What led you to kind of become interested in this field as a whole?
So believe it or not, I got interested in the sleep and fatigue world through an interest in dreams.
Really?
When I was a kid, I didn't read a lot of novels. For some reason, I took a shining to dreams. So I read tons and tons of books on dreams, in
meaning behind dreams and all that.
Everything. Where do they come from? How does the brain function during dreaming? All of these things. And then when I went to university, I said, well, who looks at dreams? Well, it's these psychologists. So I studied psychology. And then within the first year of my studies, had a great epiphany. And you're probably going to think, well, why didn't you think about this sooner? Dreams occur during sleep. Surprising. Right? So to learn about dreams, I had to learn more about sleep. So that's where I started learning more about sleep. And then that took me down the path of understanding sleep, understanding fatigue and its impact on our daily lives.
Right. And if I remember correctly, I think the dreams that you remember are the ones that occur right before waking up, correct? where you're kind of coming out of those REM cycles?
Yeah, so there's some really great studies where they look at people who say, I've never dreamed. I never ever dream. And what they can do is they can take people like that, so low frequency recallers, and turn them into what they call high frequency recallers, where they remember a dream every single morning. The trick or the notion that you just mentioned, that the dreams you remember are the ones you wake up from, or ones that occur close to waking up. It's because one of the best ways to remember a dream is to wake up during that dream. Dreams occur during, as you mentioned, during REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, more often than in the other stages of sleep. And we tend to have most of our REM sleep at the end of the night. So the latter half of the night, there's a lot more REM sleep than at the beginning half. And we wake up at the end of the night, so there's a good chance you're going to wake up from REM sleep. If you wake up from REM sleep, there's a good chance you're going to remember your dream more, or more likely to remember it. Yeah.
Right.
So there's physiological brain reasons why we remember the dreams that occur closer to waking up. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that if I wake up in the morning and I feel like I've dreamt all night, I actually wake up tired.
Yeah, and one of the reasons for that is your brain cannot tell the difference if you're dreaming or you're awake. Right? So when I was working in the sleep clinics and doing both clinical work and research work, we would tape a bunch of sensors to people, electrodes on their brain, monitor heart rate, monitor breathing. When you are in a dream, all of those measures start to become much more erratic. They start to look like what you would see in a person who is awake doing the behavior they're dreaming about. So you're actually more active in in REM sleep, in the dream state, than when you're not. So if you do end up dreaming a lot more, there's, again, physiological reasons for why you're feeling more fatigued when you wake up. But there's also this interesting, much more mental phenomena or psychological phenomena where if it feels like you've been awake and active all night long, even if you had a great night of sleep, you still feel fatigued.
Yes. And then it just creates that effect again where you feel like you look at the clock and said, okay, I went to sleep at 10:30, I woke up at 7. That's a pretty nice chunk of sleep. However, I feel like I dreamt the entire night and I go to work tired.
Yeah, and that's a really important point. So, we'd have to look into whether or not you're having more REM sleep, whether or not you might actually be having what we call microawakenings or arousals in the middle of the night, where you wake up just for a few seconds, which helps you remember the dream. We'd have to, understand what is going on exactly to make a conclusion. But what it points out is that just because you have the right quantity of sleep, if it's a poor quality of sleep, or if it feels like a poor quality of sleep, it increases the risk of fatigue too. So you can sleep for 9-10 hours and still feel fatigued if the quality of the sleep is not sufficient.
Right. Now you talked about really how education about this entire field is really what's going to help someone at work. What goes hand in hand with that education? Is it just more utilizing the knowledge in other areas, or what do you think?
Okay, so first thing you got to think about is what is the education you're providing? Right? So if you want to see some good changes out of that education, what you need to do is ensure that people understand how you become fatigued. What is sleep-related fatigue? And you've got to discuss or teach them about poor quality and poor quantity of sleep, but also some of the scientifically based limitations to the quality and quantity of sleep. So for example, if you sleep for 3 hours for just one night, that's what we call acute or short-term disruption to the quantity of your sleep. It increases the risk of fatigue, right? If you are awake in the middle of the night, your brain thinks it should be asleep, that increases the risk of fatigue. So you have to teach people about the fatigue risk factors
Mm-hmm.
If they know the risk factors, the things that produce fatigue or result in fatigue, then they can take steps to reduce those fatigue risk factors. But they might not know how to reduce them, so you have to give them some information on how to reduce the risk factors. Then try as hard as people want. Prevention can only take you so far. You have to then give people tools and education around what I refer to as fatigue countermeasures. So, you know, I got a great night of sleep, I think, or I tried really hard to get a great night of sleep.
Right.
I put my sleep, moved my sleep ahead a little bit, so it's really close to when I started my evening shift. But at the end of the evening shift, I'm now fatigued. I'm finishing at 2 o'clock in the morning, and now I've got to drive home. Well, it's understandable. You know, they tried as best they could to ensure their sleep quality and quantity were fine. But you're now driving home at 2 or 3 in the morning. Your brain thinks it's asleep. It should be asleep, so it's going to be more fatigued. So you need a countermeasure, something to fight fatigue after you've already tried to prevent it as much as you can. And strategies like a low dose of caffeine a couple of hours before you drive home. Mm-hmm. A blast of bright light, exposure to bright light can help bring up alertness. So if you're looking into trying to experience some of these good benefits, you got to make sure that you give the people the right information.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Clinton, for joining us today at DORN's Injury Prevention Academy. This has just been really interesting because so much of wellness, people think of, oh, well, you know, I eat right, I exercise. But if you're not getting that baseline of sleep, if you're not having the knowledge and the education for what informs fatigue, that's going to make overall wellness so much more difficult.
Yeah, very good point. You have to understand what influences fatigue so that you can make the appropriate changes. And it's not always as simple as people think, right? There's some pretty complex challenges that need to be overcome, and we've talked about some of them. You know, organizational culture, giving people the right education, et cetera, to be able to get those positive benefits out of it. But, you know, thank you for having me on and helping me share my message.
Absolutely.
And, you know, supporting all of the great work that DORN does on fatigue and sleep management too.
Yes. Yeah, no, thank you. And for our audience, please tune in next time to learn even more about some of the innovative steps, the education, and the programs taking place in today's world of safety. Thank you so much.